I found my daughter Sarah crying in the snow on Christmas Eve, her lips blue and her wedding dress torn, while inside the house her husband's family celebrated around a roaring fireplace like she didn't even exist. Let me tell you something. If you've ever held your child while they sob from betrayal, you know there's a rage that burns so deep it changes your DNA. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt that helpless fury when someone hurts the person you love most, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what I did next, well, it took me 3 years to plan, and it destroyed lives in ways I never imagined. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I'm 63 years old. I've lived through Vietnam, buried my wife, built a construction company from nothing, and thought I'd seen every kind of human cruelty this world had to offer. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed that Christmas Eve in 2019. Sarah had been married to Derek Whitman for 2 years. The Whitmans were old money, the kind of family that traces their lineage back to the Mayflower and never lets you forget it. Their estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, looked like something out of a movie, with its towering oak trees and wrought iron gates that cost more than most people's houses. Derek was handsome in that entitled, polo-playing way that screams, "Trust fund baby." But Sarah loved him, and that was enough for me. Or so I thought. I'd driven up from my place in Pennsylvania to spend Christmas with them. The plan was simple: arrive Christmas Eve, stay through New Year's, try to bond with my son-in-law's family. Sarah had been nervous about it for weeks, constantly calling me with little warnings about their traditions and their ways of doing things. I should have paid more attention to the fear in her voice. The Whitman house was lit up like Versailles when I pulled my pickup truck through those imposing gates. I could hear laughter and music spilling out into the cold December air. The circular driveway was packed with luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, a Bentley that probably cost more than I made in 5 years. My beat-up Ford looked like a peasant among royalty. I grabbed the gifts from my truck bed, nothing fancy, just some homemade items from my workshop and a cashmere scarf I'd saved up months to buy Sarah. As I walked toward the massive front door, I could see through the tall windows into what looked like a scene from a Christmas catalog. 20 or 30 people in expensive clothes, holding crystal glasses, gathered around a fireplace that could roast an entire pig. But Sarah wasn't among them. I knocked on the door, and Derek answered with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was already drunk. I could smell the bourbon on his breath, and his bow tie was crooked. "Robert! Merry Christmas!" he said, but his tone carried that subtle condescension I'd grown to hate. Come in, come in. We were just telling stories about the old days." I stepped into their foyer, which was bigger than my entire living room, complete with a chandelier that threw rainbow patterns across marble floors. The warmth hit me immediately. They had that place heated like a tropical resort, while outside it was barely 20 degrees. "Where's Sarah?" I asked, looking around at the crowd of strangers who'd barely glanced in my direction. Derek's smile flickered. "Oh, she's around somewhere. You know how she gets during parties. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." But I wasn't interested in meeting his family. I wanted to see my daughter. Something in Derek's evasive answer made my stomach clench with worry. Sarah wasn't shy. She was actually the opposite, always the life of the party, always making sure everyone felt included. For her to be absent from her own Christmas celebration was wrong. I followed Derek into the main living area, where his relatives were clustered around that magnificent fireplace. The heat was almost overwhelming after coming in from the cold. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfume mixed with the scent of pine from their enormous tree, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. "Everyone, this is Sarah's father, Robert," Derek announced to the room. A few people turned and offered polite nods, but most continued their conversations as if I hadn't entered at all. Derek's mother, Patricia Whitman, approached with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She was elegant in that ice-cold way that money can buy, perfect silver hair, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, jewelry that caught the firelight and threw it back like tiny daggers. "Robert, how lovely to finally meet you properly," she said, extending a hand that felt like shaking hands with a mannequin. Derek has told us so much about you. The way she said it made me feel like I was some kind of curiosity, a blue-collar specimen they'd heard about but never expected to encounter in their natural habitat. Where's Sarah? I asked again, louder this time. Patricia's smile tightened. Oh, she's upstairs. She was feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the excitement. You know how sensitive she can be. Sensitive. The word dripped with disdain. My Sarah, who'd helped me rebuild engines when she was 12, who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, who never met a challenge she couldn't handle, they called her sensitive. I'd like to see her, I said. Perhaps it's better to let her rest, Patricia replied, but I was already moving toward the staircase. Derek caught my arm. Dad, can I call you Dad? She really is just tired. Why don't you have a drink with us? We were just about to start the gift exchange. The way he gripped my arm, the slight desperation in his voice, the fact that no one in this room seemed the least bit concerned about my daughter's absence, it all clicked together like puzzle pieces forming a picture I didn't want to see. I pulled away from Derek's grip and headed for the stairs. Behind me, I heard Patricia whisper something sharp to her son, but I didn't care. Every instinct I'd developed in 63 years of life was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The second floor was quieter, though I could still hear the party below. The hallway was lined with portraits of women ancestors, all looking down with the same cold, judgmental eyes. I found the master bedroom and knocked on the door. Sarah? Honey, it's Dad. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. Sarah? I called louder, pressing my ear to the door. That's when I heard it, a soft sobbing, barely audible over the party noise from downstairs. I knocked harder. Sarah, open this door right now! The crying stopped. I heard movement, then my daughter's voice, barely above a whisper. Dad? I can't. Please just go back downstairs. Like hell I will. Open this door, or I'm going to break it down. More shuffling, then the sound of the lock turning. The door cracked open just enough for me to see part of Sarah's face, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, purple and black bruising spreading across her cheekbone. Her lip was split and crusted with dried blood. She was wearing a nightgown that was torn at the shoulder, and I could see finger-shaped bruises on her neck. Jesus Christ! I breathed, pushing the door open wider. Sarah stumbled backward, trying to hide her face. Dad, please, you can't be up here. If they find you. If they find me, what? I stepped into the room and gently turned her face toward the light. The extent of her injuries became clear, and I felt something inside me break and reshape into something harder, angrier. Sarah, who did this to you? She wouldn't meet my eyes. It's complicated, Dad. You don't understand how things work here. I understand that someone beat the hell out of my daughter while their family parties downstairs like nothing happened. Was it Derek? Her silence was answer enough. I pulled out my phone. We're calling the police right now, and then we're getting you out of here. No! Sarah grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Dad, you can't. Please, you have to trust me on this. If you call the police, it'll make everything worse. Worse? Sarah, look at yourself. How could this possibly get worse? She sank onto the edge of the bed, and I noticed she was favoring her left side, like her ribs were injured too. You don't know them, Dad. You don't know what they're capable of. Derek's family has connections everywhere, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs. They've made it very clear what will happen if I try to leave or cause trouble. The rage building in my chest felt like lava, hot and destructive and desperate for release. What kind of threats? Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. They said they'd destroy you. Your business, your reputation, everything. Patricia showed me photos of your construction sites, Dad. She knows where you live, where you work, who you do business with. She said making people disappear is just a matter of knowing the right people and having enough money. I stared at my daughter, this strong woman who never backed down from anything in her life, and saw her reduced to a trembling, broken shadow of herself. And downstairs, the people responsible were laughing and celebrating, warm and safe and utterly confident in their untouchability. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "Since the wedding? Maybe before." Sarah's voice was flat, defeated. "It started small. Derek would grab me too hard when he'd been drinking, or he'd shove me during arguments. But his family, they encouraged it. Patricia said I needed to learn my place, that I wasn't born into this world and needed to be taught proper respect." I felt my hands shake with fury. "And tonight? I tried to come to the party. I wanted to be there when you arrived, to show them that I belong. But Derek said I was dressed inappropriately, that I was embarrassing the family. When I argued with him..." She gestured to her face. "In front of everyone? No, they're too smart for that. Derek dragged me upstairs during cocktail hour, before most of the guests arrived. Patricia came up afterward to check on me, to make sure I understood that if I made a scene, there would be consequences." I looked around the room and noticed details I'd missed in my initial shock. The bedroom window was locked with a key that wasn't in sight. Sarah's suitcase sat in the corner, but it was empty. Her clothes were nowhere to be seen. On the nightstand was a single glass of water, and what looked like pain medication. "They're keeping you prisoner," I said. Sarah nodded. "Basically. They said I could come down and join the party once I learned to control myself, once I apologized to Derek and his mother for my outburst." "But Dad..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't have an outburst. I just asked if I could wear the dress you bought me for my birthday instead of the one Patricia picked out." The dress I'd bought her. A simple but elegant blue dress that had cost me a week's pay because I wanted my daughter to have something beautiful. And they'd beaten her for wanting to wear it. I sat beside her on the bed and carefully put my arm around her shoulders, feeling her wince at even that gentle touch. "We're leaving. Right now." "I can't, Dad. I told you. I don't care what they threatened. I don't care about my business or my reputation or anything else. We're getting you out of this house tonight." But even as I said it, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Derek's voice carried up the hallway. "Dad, what's taking so long?" "Mother's asking for you." Sarah went rigid with terror. "You have to go," she whispered urgently. "Please, Dad. If Derek finds you up here with me like this, he'll lose control completely." The footsteps were getting closer. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to confront Derek right then or play along with their sick game until I could figure out a better plan. I looked at my daughter's battered face and made a choice that would haunt me for the next 3 years. "I'm going to get you out of here," I whispered. "But not tonight. Tonight I'm going to learn everything I can about these people, and then I'm going to destroy them in ways they never saw coming." Sarah grabbed my hand. "Dad, don't do anything stupid. Please." "Don't worry, sweetheart. What I'm going to do won't be stupid at all." I kissed the top of her head and walked to the door. Derek was standing in the hallway, his face flushed with alcohol and something that might have been fear. "There you are," he said too loudly. "Sarah feeling better?" "She's resting," I replied, studying his face. Up close, I could see the tiny scratches on his knuckles where they'd connected with my daughter's skin. "Seems like she had quite a fall." Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, well, she's always been clumsy. Especially after a few drinks." I nodded slowly, committing every detail to memory. "Good thing she has family to take care of her." "Exactly," Derek said, relaxing slightly. "Come on, let's get back to the party. You're missing all the fun." As we walked back toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse through one of the hallway windows. The view looked out over the back of the property, toward what appeared to be a guest house or servants' quarters. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure in one of those windows, someone watching the main house. But Derek was already guiding me back downstairs, back to the warmth and laughter and celebration, back to the room full of people who knew exactly what was happening to my daughter and didn't care. I spent the rest of that Christmas Eve playing the part of the grateful, slightly overwhelmed future father-in-law. I laughed at their stories, admired their house, and listened carefully to every single word they said. I memorized faces, noted relationships, filed away every casual mention of business dealings or family connections. And all the while, I kept thinking about Sarah locked in that bedroom above us, probably listening to the sounds of merriment, while nursing injuries that would take weeks to heal. When I finally left that night, they didn't invite me to stay over, naturally. I drove straight to a motel and spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans that grew darker and more elaborate with each passing hour. I'd walked into that house as a father hoping to connect with his daughter's new family. I left as a man with a single, burning purpose: to make the Whitmans pay for every bruise, every tear, every moment of fear they'd inflicted on my child. What I didn't know then was how long it would take, how much it would cost me, or how many lives would be destroyed before I was done. But I was about to find out. The hardest part about revenge isn't the execution, it's the waiting. And I waited exactly 97 days before I made my first move. Those 3 months after Christmas were the longest of my life. I had to watch my daughter fade away like a ghost, taking phone calls from Derek and Patricia that left her shaking and hollow-eyed, pretending everything was fine while I could see her soul dying a little more each day. If you've ever felt that helpless rage, that need for justice that burns in your chest until you can barely breathe, you know why I couldn't just let this go. And if you're still here listening to this story, hit that like button, because what I'm about to tell you will show you exactly how far a father will go to protect his child. Sarah came to stay with me in February, 3 weeks after what she called another incident. She didn't tell me details, but I could see fresh bruises on her wrists and a haunted look in her eyes that reminded me of soldiers I'd known in Vietnam. The Whitmans had let her come visit me as a mental health break, their words delivered through Derek with that same condescending tone I'd grown to hate. But I knew it wasn't kindness. They wanted her isolated, cut off from any support system, dependent entirely on their mercy. What they didn't realize was that they'd just given me exactly what I needed: time alone with my daughter and access to information they never meant for me to have. It started with Sarah's laptop. She'd left it open on my kitchen table one morning while she was in the shower, and I saw an email from Patricia marked "Urgent Family Matters." My conscience wrestled with my curiosity for about 5 seconds before curiosity won. What I found in Sarah's email account was a roadmap to 3 generations of Whitman family secrets. There were hundreds of emails dating back 2 years, messages that painted a picture of a family so corrupt and twisted that Derek's abuse was just the tip of the iceberg. Patricia wrote about business deals that sounded suspiciously like money laundering. Derek's father, Charles, discussed political donations that were clearly bribes. There were references to cleaning up problems and making inconveniences disappear. That made my blood run cold. But the emails that really caught my attention were the ones about me. Patricia had hired a private investigator to compile a complete dossier on my life within a week of Sarah's wedding. They knew everything: my military record, my business finances, my mortgage payments, even my medical history. They had photos of my construction sites, lists of my employees, and detailed reports on my clients. The investigator's final report was brutally efficient. Subject is financially vulnerable due to recent equipment purchases and expansion debt. Primary weakness is deep attachment to daughter and strong sense of justice/honor. Recommend financial pressure and implied threats to daughter's safety to ensure compliance. They'd studied me like a lab rat, looking for exactly the right pressure points to keep me in line. And it had worked perfectly, until now. I spent the next 2 weeks carefully copying every email, every document, every piece of evidence I could find. Sarah thought I was just being supportive, making her meals and giving her space to recover. She had no idea I was building a case file that would eventually destroy her husband's entire family. The breakthrough came when I found Patricia's correspondence with a man named Vincent Kowalski. Vincent ran a private security company that specialized in what they called reputation management and problem resolution. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Vincent's services included blackmail, intimidation, and worse. The emails revealed that the Whitmans had used his services at least a dozen times over the past 5 years to silence business rivals, discredit political opponents, and cover up various family scandals. Most disturbing was an email from just after Christmas where Patricia wrote, "The situation with Dee's wife remains problematic. She may require more intensive management if standard methods continue to prove insufficient." Standard methods. That's what they called beating my daughter. Vincent's response was chilling. "If escalation becomes necessary, I recommend the hunting cabin approach. Remote location, no witnesses, plenty of time for attitude adjustment. Has worked well for similar domestic compliance issues." I printed that email and stared at it for hours. These people weren't just abusing Sarah, they were planning to kidnap her, to take her somewhere she could never be found, to break her completely. That's when I stopped planning and started preparing for war. The first thing I did was liquidate everything I could without raising suspicion. I sold my extra equipment, cashed in my retirement savings, and took out a second mortgage on my house. Within 3 weeks, I had nearly $200,000 in cash, not enough to match their resources, but enough to hire the right kind of help. I reached out to some old military contacts, guys who'd stayed in the business of making problems disappear. Through a chain of carefully placed phone calls, I was eventually connected with a woman named Maria Santos. Maria ran a small but extremely effective private investigation firm that specialized in taking down wealthy families who thought they were above the law. She was expensive, she was thorough, and she had absolutely no qualms about using information in ways that would make prosecutors weep. Our first meeting was in a diner outside Philadelphia, at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Maria was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning battles other people don't even know they're fighting. I laid out everything I knew about the Whitmans, showed her the emails, told her about Sarah's situation. Maria listened without taking notes, occasionally asking questions that revealed she understood the bigger picture better than I did. "You want them destroyed?" she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Completely," I replied. "That's going to take time. And money. And patience. I have all three." Maria smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. "Good. Because what you're asking for isn't just revenge, it's justice. And justice is expensive." She quoted me a fee that would consume most of my liquid assets. I didn't hesitate. "One more thing," Maria said as we were finishing up. "Your daughter can't know what we're doing. Not until it's over. The moment she shows any awareness of our operation, they'll know someone's working against them, and they'll escalate immediately." "How do you know?" "Because I've taken down families like the Whitmans before. They're predators, but they're also paranoid. The slightest hint that someone's hunting them, and they'll go scorched earth. Your daughter will be the first casualty." I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was telling me. I was about to spend the next year lying to Sarah, pretending to accept her situation, while secretly building the means to free her. "How long?" I asked. 18 months, maybe 2 years. Depends what we find and how careful we need to be." 2 years. 2 more years of watching my daughter suffer while I pretended to be helpless. "It's worth it," Maria said, reading my expression. "Trust me. When we're done, they won't just be destroyed, they'll be obliterated. Their name will be poison, their money will be gone, and they'll spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders." I shook her hand. "Let's do it." The next phase of my education began immediately. Maria had me install encrypted communication software on my phone, taught me how to take photographs without being detected, and showed me techniques for gathering information that I'd never learned in Vietnam. My first assignment was to map the Whitman family's complete network, every business associate, every political connection, every friend and ally who helped maintain their power. Maria explained that wealthy families like the Whitmans were like spider webs. They looked strong and impenetrable, but they were actually fragile structures held together by a few key threads. Cut the right threads, and the entire web would collapse. I became a student of the Whitman Empire. I learned that Charles Whitman's real estate development company was built on a foundation of bribes and environmental violations that went back 30 years. Patricia's charity work was actually an elaborate tax avoidance scheme that funneled millions of dollars into offshore accounts. Derek's import business was a front for moving money that couldn't be traced through legitimate channels. But the real discovery came when I started researching Vincent Kowalski's security company. Vincent had been busy. Over the past decade, his firm had been involved in dozens of cases where wealthy clients needed problems to disappear. I found newspaper articles about business rivals who'd died in suspicious accidents, journalists who'd stopped investigating certain stories after receiving death threats, and politicians who'd changed their votes after private meetings with Vincent's associates. The pattern was always the same. Someone would become inconvenient to a wealthy client, Vincent's company would be hired to handle the situation, and the problem would vanish. Sometimes the targets were discredited or financially ruined. Sometimes they simply disappeared. 3 months into my investigation, I found something that changed everything. Vincent's company had been hired by the Whitmans 5 years earlier to handle a domestic issue involving Derek's first wife, Amanda. I'd never known Derek had been married before. Sarah had never mentioned it, and the Whitmans certainly hadn't brought it up during family gatherings. But there it was in Patricia's emails, detailed discussions about the Amanda situation, and how it needed to be resolved permanently. Amanda Richardson had been Derek's college girlfriend, a psychology student from a middle-class family who'd gotten pregnant during their senior year. They'd married quickly, and for about 6 months, everything had seemed fine. Then Amanda started asking questions about Derek's family's business dealings, expressing concerns about some of the people who visited their house, wondering why her husband carried so much cash and made so many unexplained trips. The emails revealed that Patricia had initially tried to buy Amanda's silence. When that failed, they'd escalated to threats. When Amanda had threatened to go to the police, Vincent Kowalski had been called in. Amanda Richardson had died in a car accident on a rainy night in November, 6 months after her wedding. The police report said she'd been drinking, that she'd lost control of her car on a winding country road. Case closed. But Vincent's invoices told a different story. He'd been paid $50,000 for automotive consultation the week before Amanda's death. His expense reports included payments to a mechanic who specialized in brake system modifications and surveillance equipment to track Amanda's daily routes. They'd murdered Derek's first wife, and they made it look like an accident. I sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at printouts of those invoices, and realized I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was building a murder case. I called Maria immediately. "You found something," she said, picking up on the first ring. "They killed his first wife." Long silence. "Are you sure?" I read her the details. When I finished, Maria was quiet for a long time. "This changes everything," she said finally. "We're not just taking down a family anymore, we're solving a murder. What does that mean for Sarah? It means we move faster. And it means when this is over, Derek and his parents won't just lose their money and reputation. They'll spend the rest of their lives in prison." I felt something that had been twisted tight in my chest finally start to loosen. Justice. Real justice, not just revenge. "There's something else," Maria said. "If they killed Amanda, Sarah's in more danger than we realized. They've done this before, and they know they can get away with it." The weight of that truth hit me like a physical blow. I'd been planning a calculated campaign to destroy the Whitmans over the course of 2 years. But Sarah might not have 2 years. If they decided she was too much trouble, if she pushed back too hard or asked the wrong questions. "We need to accelerate the timeline," I said. "Agreed. But Robert, and this is important, we get one shot at this. If we move too fast and they realize what's happening, Sarah dies. If we move too slow, Sarah dies. We have to thread the needle perfectly." I closed my eyes and thought about my daughter, probably lying awake in that mansion right now, wondering if her father was ever going to save her. "Then we'd better not miss," I said. "You know what they say about the best laid plans. They survive right up until you realize your enemy isn't just evil, they're smart." and the Whitmans were a lot smarter than I'd given them credit for. I discovered this the hard way in April, when Sarah called me at 2 a.m, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Dad," she whispered into the phone. "They know. Somehow they know someone's been looking into their business." My blood turned to ice water. If you've ever had that moment where everything you've worked for hangs by a thread, you know exactly how I felt. Don't forget to subscribe if this story is hitting you in the gut, because what happened next almost destroyed everything. Maria and I had been so careful. We'd used encrypted communications, hired investigators through third parties, built our case through public records and information that was theoretically available to anyone. But the Whitmans had resources I hadn't fully appreciated, and they'd been watching for threats in ways I'd never considered. "What exactly did they say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Patricia called me into her study today. She had photographs, Dad. Pictures of you meeting with someone at that diner in Philadelphia. Pictures of men I didn't recognize watching our house. She said they'd been monitoring what she called unusual interest in their family affairs." I closed my eyes. Maria. They'd photographed me with Maria. She wanted to know if you'd said anything to me about investigating them, if you'd asked me any questions about their business or their friends. I told her no, I swore I didn't know anything, but Dad. Sarah's voice cracked. She didn't believe me. "What did she do?" "She showed me more pictures. Of your house. Of your office. Of the guys who work for you. She said that if whoever was investigating them didn't stop immediately, there would be consequences. And she made it very clear that the consequences wouldn't just be for you." The threat was crystal clear, and so was my situation. I could call off the investigation and condemn my daughter to a lifetime of abuse, or I could continue and risk getting her killed. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Derek's been different the past few days. More violent, more unpredictable. It's like he's excited about something, like he's looking forward to. I don't know what. But Dad, I'm scared. Really scared." I made my decision. "Pack a bag. Tonight. Tell them you're going to visit a college friend, someone they can verify exists. Drive to my house, and don't stop for anything." "I can't. They took my car keys. And Dad, they're watching me constantly now. Even when I'm alone, I can feel them listening." Of course. They'd essentially placed her under house arrest. "Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, you're going to tell Derek that you want to make peace with his family. You're going to suggest having lunch with Patricia, just the two of you, somewhere public. A restaurant in town. Dad, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to get you out of there." I hung up and immediately called Maria. She answered on the first ring. She'd been expecting my call. "How bad is it?" she asked. I filled her in on Sarah's conversation with Patricia. When I finished, Maria was quiet for a long time. "They're moving faster than I expected," she said finally. "Usually families like this take months to investigate potential threats. The fact that they've already identified me and started taking countermeasures means they're more paranoid than normal. Or more guilty. Probably both. Robert, we have a problem. If we pull Sarah out now, we lose any chance of getting evidence that will put them away. But if we leave her in there, she dies. Maybe. Or maybe they just escalate the abuse until she's too broken to ever testify against them. Either way, we lose." I stared out my kitchen window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, my daughter was trapped in a house full of people who'd already killed once to protect their secrets. "There's a third option," I said. "I'm listening. We force their hand. Make them so angry, so scared, that they do something stupid and public. That's incredibly dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. The question is whether we're going to react to their moves or make them react to ours." Maria was quiet for a moment. "What did you have in mind? How long would it take you to get everything we have to the FBI? With what we have now? They'd open an investigation, but it would take months to build a case. Maybe years. And the Whitmans have friends in law enforcement. They know about the investigation within hours. What if we gave the FBI something they couldn't ignore? Something so explosive that they'd have to act immediately? Like what? I thought about Amanda Richardson, Derek's first wife who died in that convenient car accident. About Vincent Kowalski's invoices for automotive consultation and brake system modifications. About a family so arrogant they documented their own crimes. Like a murder. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first was to Tommy Brennan, a guy I'd served with in Vietnam who'd spent the last 20 years working as a private investigator specializing in cold cases. Tommy owed me a couple of favors, and more importantly, he had contacts in police departments across 3 states. I need you to take a fresh look at a car accident that happened 5 years ago, I told him. Woman named Amanda Richardson died in Connecticut. I think it might not have been an accident. Tommy was intrigued. What makes you think that? I couldn't tell him about the invoices, not yet. But I could give him enough to start digging. Her husband came into a lot of money right after she died. His family has a history of making problems disappear. And there are some financial records that don't add up. I'll take a look. Give me a week. The second call was harder. I contacted Amanda Richardson's parents, who were still living in Ohio. They never believed their daughter's death was an accident, but the police investigation had been closed quickly and they never had the resources to pursue it further. If you had evidence that Amanda was murdered, I asked her mother, would you be willing to take it to the FBI? Mrs. Richardson's voice shook with emotion. I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask me that question. The third call was to a reporter named Janet Morrison, who worked for a newspaper that specialized in exposing corruption among wealthy families. Maria had mentioned Janet as someone who couldn't be bought and wouldn't be intimidated. I didn't give Janet any specifics, just enough to get her interested. If you were looking for a story about a wealthy Connecticut family that might be connected to a suspicious death, where would you start? With the death certificate, the police report, and the insurance payout. Janet replied without hesitation. Why? Do you have something? Maybe. How long would it take you to investigate a story like that? Depends what I find. Could be days, could be months. But if there's really something there, if a wealthy family has been covering up a murder for 5 years, that's front-page material. What would you need to make it front-page material? Documentation. Witnesses. Financial records showing motive. And someone willing to go on record. I had the documentation and the financial records. The witnesses might be harder to find, but Tommy could help with that. The real question was whether Amanda's parents would be willing to go public with their suspicions. Give me 2 weeks, I told Janet. I might have something for you. But even as I made these calls, I knew I was walking a tightrope. Every move I made increased the risk to Sarah, but doing nothing guaranteed her destruction. The Whitmans were already suspicious, already watching. The only question was whether I could move fast enough to expose them before they silenced my daughter permanently. The break I needed came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my conversation with Sarah, she called me with information that changed everything. Her voice was stronger, more determined than I'd heard in months. Dad, I found something. Derek was drunk last night, really drunk, and he started bragging about how his family had handled problems in the past. He told me about Amanda. My heart stopped. He told you about his first wife? He said she'd been getting too curious about things she shouldn't have been curious about. He said his mother had tried to be patient with her, but that some people just don't know when to stop asking questions. Did he say anything else? He said Amanda thought she was so smart, thought she could threaten the family and get away with it. But that Vincent had shown her how wrong she was. Vincent Kowalski. Derek had actually named Vincent in connection with Amanda's death. Dad, there's more. Derek said Vincent still works for the family, that he's been handling the investigation problem they're dealing with now. He said Vincent had identified the people looking into their business, and that they were going to be dealt with soon. The people. Plural. They knew about Maria, And they probably knew about Tommy and possibly Janet as well. We weren't just compromised, we were walking into a trap. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow, when Derek sobers up, I want you to tell him that you were so upset by what he said about Amanda that you can't remember most of it. Can you do that? Yes, but Dad. And I need you to start keeping a record of everything they say about Vincent, about Amanda, about anything related to their business. Write it down, hide it somewhere they'll never find it. Okay. But what are you going to do? I'm going to make sure Vincent Kowalski never hurts anyone again. That night, I called Maria and told her about Derek's drunken confession. Her response was immediate and decisive. We're accelerating everything. Tomorrow, I'm taking what we have to the FBI field office in Philadelphia. It's not as complete as I'd like, but Derek's admission to Sarah about Vincent and Amanda gives us enough to get a federal investigation started. What about Sarah? She's going to have to stay put for now. If she disappears right before the FBI starts asking questions, the Whitmans will know she's the source. But Robert, once this investigation becomes official, she'll be under federal protection. How long? 48 hours, maybe less. I have contacts in the Bureau who specialize in organized crime families. When they see what we've compiled, especially the connection between Vincent's company and Amanda's death, they'll move fast. I wanted to feel relieved, but something nagged at me. The Whitmans were too smart, too careful to let themselves be exposed this easily. They'd been covering their tracks for decades. Why would they suddenly become sloppy? The answer came to me as I was falling asleep. They weren't being sloppy. They were preparing to run. I jolted awake and immediately called Maria back. They're liquidating, I said as soon as she answered. Think about it. Derek getting drunk and confessing to Sarah, Patricia showing her photographs of our investigation, Vincent identifying all the threats. They're not trying to stop us anymore. They're buying time to disappear. Maria was quiet for a moment. You might be right. If they're planning to flee, they'd want to eliminate any loose ends first. Sarah's a loose end. So are we. The next morning, I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. Instead of waiting for Maria to approach the FBI through official channels, I drove directly to Amanda Richardson's parents' house in Ohio and laid out everything I knew. I showed them Vincent's invoices, Patricia's emails, and Derek's drunken confession to Sarah about Amanda's murder. Mrs. Richardson broke down crying when she saw the documents. Her husband just stared at the papers with a mixture of rage and vindication. We knew, he said quietly. We always knew she didn't just lose control of her car. Amanda was the most careful driver I'd ever seen. She wouldn't have been drinking and driving, especially not on a road she traveled hundreds of times. Will you help me stop them? I asked. They agreed immediately. That afternoon, the three of us walked into the FBI field office in Cincinnati and demanded to speak to someone about a murder case. We brought copies of everything: the financial records, the emails, the invoices, Derek's confession as related by Sarah. The agent who interviewed us was skeptical at first, but as we laid out the evidence, I could see his expression change. When we got to Vincent Kowalski's invoices for automotive consultation and brake system modifications, he stopped taking notes and started making phone calls. Within 6 hours, there were FBI agents at Vincent's business, at the Whitman estate, and at Derek's import company. The investigation I'd planned to build over 2 years was suddenly happening in real time, with federal agents and forensic accountants swarming over every aspect of the Whitman empire. But the Whitmans had one final card to play, and it almost cost my daughter her life. Sarah called me at 11 that night, whispering so quietly I could barely hear her. Dad, they're gone. Derek, Patricia, Charles, they left about an hour ago. Vincent came to the house, and they had a meeting in Charles's study. I could hear them arguing, something about federal surveillance and burning everything. Then they just left. Where are you now? Still in the house, but Dad, I think they left someone behind. I can hear someone moving around downstairs, and all the lights are off except in the kitchen. My blood went cold. Get out. Right now. Don't pack anything, Don't try to be quiet, just run. I can't. They took my car keys, remember? And the phones aren't working. I'm calling you on Derek's old cell phone I found in a drawer. Then hide. Find somewhere they won't look and stay there until morning. The FBI will be back at the house first thing tomorrow. But even as I said it, I knew Sarah didn't have until morning. The Whitmans had fled, which meant they were cutting all ties to their old life. And Sarah was the biggest tie of all, the one person who could testify about Derek's confession, about the family's threats, about everything she'd witnessed during her marriage. I grabbed my keys and started driving toward Connecticut, calling 911 every few minutes to report a break-in at the Whitman estate. But I knew I was at least 4 hours away, and Sarah needed help immediately. That's when Tommy Brennan called me back. Robert, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but there are federal agents crawling all over that car accident case I was looking into. They reopened the Amanda Richardson investigation this afternoon. Tommy, I need a favor. A big one. Right now. Name it. My daughter is trapped in a house with someone who's probably been sent to kill her. The house is the Whitman estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. I need you to call every cop you know in that area and get them to that address immediately. Consider it done. Tommy's connections proved invaluable. Within 20 minutes, local police were surrounding the Whitman estate, and Sarah was running out the front door into the arms of federal agents who'd arrived just behind them. The man they found in the house was one of Vincent's associates, armed with a pistol and a can of gasoline. The FBI's forensics team later determined that he'd been preparing to burn down the house with Sarah inside, making it look like she'd died in an accidental fire. Instead, he was arrested on federal charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. The Whitmans themselves disappeared that night, but their empire was already crumbling. Federal agents had seized their bank accounts, their properties, and all their business records. Vincent Kowalski was arrested at his office, where agents found detailed files on dozens of problems he'd solved for wealthy clients over the years. Amanda Richardson's body was exhumed and re-examined by federal forensic experts, who found evidence that her brake lines had been cut just as Vincent's invoices had suggested. Derek, Patricia, and Charles Whitman were indicted for murder, conspiracy, witness tampering, and about 20 other federal crimes. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because when you destroy a family as connected and powerful as the Whitmans, the wreckage spreads in ways you never expect. And some of that wreckage was about to land on people I cared about more than my own life. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody warns you that justice comes with a bill that keeps growing long after you think you've paid in full. The Whitmans were in federal custody, Sarah was safe, and I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt like I was standing in the ruins of my own life, watching everything I'd built over 63 years crumble to dust. If you've ever won a battle but lost the war, if you've ever gotten exactly what you thought you wanted only to realize it cost you everything that actually mattered, then you know what it feels like to get justice in America. And if this story is reminding you that sometimes the good guys pay the highest price, hit that subscribe button, because what happened next taught me that destroying evil doesn't always create good. The first bill came due 3 weeks after the arrests. I was sitting in my kitchen, reading the morning paper's coverage of the Whitman investigation, when someone knocked on my door. It was my business partner, Frank Morrison, and his expression told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. "Robert, we need to talk." Frank and I had been partners for 15 years. He'd helped me build Morrison and Mitchell Construction from a 2-man operation into one of the most respected contracting firms in central Pennsylvania. He was also one of the most honest men I'd ever known, which made what he had to tell me even more devastating. "The insurance company is pulling our coverage," he said, settling into the chair across from my kitchen table. "All of it. Liability, workers' comp, equipment, everything." I felt my stomach drop. "Why?" "They say we're too high risk now. The investigator told me that having a principal partner involved in a federal murder investigation makes us uninsurable. But I'm not under investigation. I'm the one who helped solve the case." Frank nodded sadly. "Doesn't matter. The insurance companies don't distinguish between helping the FBI and being investigated by them," All they see is Robert Mitchell connected to organized crime, murder, and federal law enforcement. From their perspective, we're radioactive. Without insurance, we couldn't bid on any major projects. Without major projects, we couldn't pay our employees or service our equipment loans. Without revenue, the business would be bankrupt within 2 months. There's more, Frank continued. I've been making calls, trying to find alternative coverage. Most companies won't even take our calls once they run our names through their databases. The few that will are quoting premiums so high they'd eat up all our profits. I stared at him, understanding beginning to dawn. How bad is it? Bad. We're going to have to lay off 12 people by Friday. Cancel the Jefferson County project. Default on the equipment loans. Frank's voice cracked slightly. Robert, we're finished. 15 years of building something meaningful, something I was proud of, and it was gone because I'd chosen to protect my daughter. I tried to feel angry about the injustice, but mostly I felt numb. I'm sorry, Frank. This is all my fault. Frank shook his head. You did what any father would do. I don't blame you for that. But Robert, there's something else you need to know. The guys are talking. Some of them are angry about losing their jobs, and they're saying things. What kind of things? They're saying you brought this on yourself. That you could have handled things quietly, kept your family problems private. They think you destroyed the business to get revenge on people who never hurt them. The words hit harder than I'd expected. These were men I'd worked with for years, men whose kids I'd taught to fish, whose wives I'd helped when they were going through tough times. And now they saw me as the villain in their story. I understand, I said. Frank stood up to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Robert, I think you did the right thing. Those people killed Derek's first wife, and they would have killed Sarah too. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you have. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and tried to calculate the full cost of my revenge. The business was gone. That was about $2 million in assets, equipment, and future earnings. My reputation in the construction industry was destroyed, which meant I'd never work in my field again. The second mortgage I'd taken to fund the investigation was still due, and without income, I'd lose the house within 6 months. But those were just the financial costs. The emotional bill was much higher. Sarah was struggling with guilt that was eating her alive. She blamed herself for everything, for marrying Derek, for not leaving sooner, for the destruction of my business, for the danger I'd put myself in to save her. No matter how many times I told her that everything I'd done was my choice, she couldn't stop feeling responsible for the wreckage. She moved back in with me after the arrests, but she wasn't really living. She barely ate, rarely spoke, and spent most of her time staring out windows or crying quietly in her old bedroom. The trauma of her marriage had been compounded by survivor's guilt, and I was watching my daughter disappear just as surely as if Derek had killed her. The therapist I'd found for her explained that Sarah was experiencing what she called rescue trauma, the psychological damage that comes from being saved at enormous cost to the people you love. Every day she stayed in my house, every meal I cooked for her, every bill I struggled to pay reminded her of what my protection had cost. She needs to feel like she's contributing to the solution, not just benefiting from your sacrifice, the therapist told me. Right now, she sees herself as the reason your life was destroyed. Until she can find a way to rebuild something positive from this situation, she's going to keep spiraling downward. But how do you rebuild when you're 63 years old, unemployable, and financially ruined? The answer came from an unexpected source, Amanda Richardson's mother. Mrs. Richardson called me on a Tuesday afternoon in June, 3 months after the arrests. Her voice was stronger than I'd heard it since our first meeting. Robert, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. Because of you, we finally know what happened to Amanda. We can finally grieve properly. You don't need to thank me, I said. Any parent would have done the same thing. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have taken the money and kept quiet. You risked everything to get justice for a girl you'd never even met. I didn't know how to respond to that. There's something I want to discuss with you, Mrs. Richardson continued. My husband and I have been talking, and we want to start a foundation. Something to help families who are dealing with domestic violence and can't afford to fight back against wealthy abusers. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. Mrs. Richardson's family had received a substantial settlement from Amanda's life insurance policy, money they'd never been able to spend because it felt like blood money. They wanted to use that money, combined with contributions from other families, to fund investigations and legal cases against abusers who thought their wealth made them untouchable. We want you to run it, Mrs. Richardson said. You know how to investigate these families, how to build cases against them. And you understand what it costs to fight back. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know how to fight. That's what matters. The Richardson Foundation for Justice became my new life's work. We started small, just Mrs. Richardson's insurance settlement, and a handful of donations from people who'd followed the Whitman case in the news. But word spread quickly through networks of domestic violence counselors, victims' rights advocates, and families who'd been destroyed by powerful abusers. Within 6 months, we'd helped expose 3 other wealthy families who were abusing their relatives. Within a year, we'd secured federal investigations in 12 states and recovered over $4 million for victims who'd been threatened into silence. Sarah found her purpose working for the foundation as well. Her experience as a victim gave her credibility with other survivors that no amount of training could provide. She became our primary victim advocate, helping other women escape situations similar to her own and testifying before Congress about the special challenges faced by people abused by wealthy families. But the foundation's success came with its own dangers. Powerful people don't like being exposed, and wealthy families have long memories. We started receiving death threats within months of opening our doors. Our phones were tapped, our computers hacked, our investigations sabotaged in ways both subtle and overt. The breaking point came in December, almost a year after the Whitman arrests. I was working late in our small office, reviewing case files for a family in Texas who'd been terrorized by their oil-rich in-laws, when I heard glass breaking in the front of the building. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept behind my desk and crept toward the sound. 3 men were in the reception area, trashing our files and pouring gasoline on everything they could reach. They weren't trying to be quiet. This wasn't a burglary. This was a message. I called 911 and barricaded myself in my office until the police arrived, but by then the men were gone and half our case files were destroyed. The police found no fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence that could lead to arrests. But I knew who was responsible. The Texas family we were investigating had the same kind of political connections as the Whitmans, the same network of people who specialized in making problems disappear. The next morning, Sarah came to work to find the office in ruins. She took one look at the destruction and started crying, not from sadness, but from rage. They're never going to leave us alone, are they? She said. No matter how many of them we put in prison, there will always be more. Probably not, I admitted. Then what's the point? What's the point of any of this if we can't ever really win? I looked at my daughter, this strong woman who'd survived abuse and trauma and guilt, and realized she was asking the same question I'd been asking myself for months. The point, I said slowly, is that every family we expose, every case we solve, every victim we help, that's someone who gets justice. Maybe we can't save everyone. Maybe we can't stop all the evil in the world. But we can stop some of it. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked around at the destroyed office. So what do we do now? We rebuild. We make copies of everything. We improve our security. And we keep fighting. But rebuilding was harder than I'd anticipated. The insurance company refused to cover the damage, claiming it was the result of our high-risk activities. Several of our major donors pulled their support, frightened by the escalation in violence. 2 of our staff members quit, unwilling to risk their safety for any amount of money. Most devastating of all, the FBI agent who'd been our primary contact on the Whitman case told us that federal law enforcement couldn't provide protection for private investigators, even ones who were helping solve federal crimes. You're on your own, Agent Martinez told me bluntly. And frankly, Robert, you should consider shutting down. These aren't street criminals you're dealing with. These are people with resources and connections, and they've made it clear they see you as a threat. I went home that night and seriously considered his advice. I was 64 years old, financially ruined, and facing enemies who had unlimited resources and no scruples. Sarah was struggling with PTSD, and every day we continued the Foundation's work put her in more danger. But then I thought about Amanda Richardson, who died because she asked the wrong questions. I thought about all the other victims we'd helped, all the families who'd found justice because we'd been willing to fight. And I thought about Derek Whitman, sitting in a federal prison cell, finally paying the price for his crimes. The next morning, I called Mrs. Richardson and told her we were expanding operations. If wealthy families wanted to play hardball with the Foundation, we'd play hardball right back. It was time to take the gloves off completely. You want to know the difference between revenge and war? Revenge has an ending. War just keeps escalating until someone can't fight anymore. By the spring of 2021, I'd learned that taking on wealthy families isn't like solving a single case. It's like punching a hornet's nest. Every family you expose has friends, allies, business partners who see your success as a threat to their own secrets. What started as my quest to save Sarah had turned into something much bigger and much more dangerous. If you've ever wondered how deep corruption really goes, how many powerful people are hiding terrible secrets, stick around for this part of the story. And if you're getting value from this, if it's opening your eyes to how the system really works, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The Richardson Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We had a staff of 12 investigators, 4 victim advocates, and enough financial backing to take on cases in 15 states. But our success had also made us enemies in ways I was just beginning to understand. The first sign came when our bank suddenly froze our accounts. I was in our new office. We'd moved to a more secure building after the break-in, when our accountant, Linda Chin, called with news that stopped my heart. Robert, I just got off the phone with First National. They're claiming there are irregularities in our financial records. They've frozen everything pending a federal investigation. What kind of irregularities? They won't say. But Robert, without access to our accounts, we can't pay staff, we can't fund investigations, we can't even pay rent on the office. I knew immediately what was happening. We'd seen this tactic before when researching other cases. Wealthy families using their banking connections to strangle organizations that threatened them. But knowing what was happening didn't make it any less effective. Within 48 hours, the story got worse. The IRS showed up at our office with a warrant to seize our files, claiming we were under investigation for tax fraud. Our lawyers told us the investigation was probably baseless, but it would take months to resolve, and in the meantime, we couldn't operate. Then came the media assault. Suddenly, stories started appearing in newspapers and on websites questioning the Foundation's methods and finances. Anonymous sources claimed we were running a scam, exploiting vulnerable families for donations. Social media accounts with thousands of followers began posting detailed accusations about my past, my business failures, even my military record. The stories were carefully crafted lies, but they were sophisticated lies. Whoever was orchestrating the campaign understood how to weaponize public opinion, how to plant just enough truth in the fiction to make the whole narrative believable. Sarah found one particularly vicious blog post that claimed she was fabricating her abuse story for sympathy and donations. The post included photos of her from before her marriage, showing her smiling and happy, with captions suggesting that someone who looked at content couldn't have been a victim of domestic violence. "Dad," she said, showing me the article on her laptop, "they're trying to destroy us the same way they destroyed their victims. Cut off our resources, isolate us from support, make everyone doubt our credibility." She was right. And it was working. Donations to the Foundation dropped by 80% within 2 weeks. 3 of our staff members resigned, citing concerns about the negative publicity. 2 families we were helping withdrew their cases, afraid of being associated with an organization under federal investigation. But the final blow came from a source I never saw coming. Frank Morrison, my former business partner, called me on a Thursday afternoon with his voice shaking with anger. "Robert, what the hell have you gotten us into? What are you talking about? The FBI showed up at my house this morning. They want to interview me about Morrison and Mitchell Construction, about our financial records, about payments we allegedly made to your foundation." My blood went cold. "What payments?" "That's what I told them. There were no payments. But they have bank records showing wire transfers from our business account to your foundation. $50,000 over 6 months. Frank, we never received any money from Morrison and Mitchell. Someone's fabricated those records. I know that, and you know that, but try explaining it to federal agents who think we were laundering money through a fake charity." The setup was brilliant and devastating. Someone had created false bank records showing that my failed construction company had been secretly funding the foundation, making it look like I was using charity donations to pay off business debts. The paper trail was so convincing that even I might have believed it if I hadn't known better. Frank's voice cracked with emotion. "Robert, they're saying I was part of a conspiracy. They're threatening to charge me with fraud. My wife is terrified, my kids are asking questions I can't answer. I don't know what to do." I felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on my shoulders. Another person I cared about was paying the price for my war against powerful families. "I'll fix this, Frank. I promise." "How? How are you going to fix federal charges? How are you going to fix my reputation? Robert, I supported what you did to save Sarah, but this is destroying innocent people." After I hung up, I sat in my office and tried to understand what was happening. The attacks were too coordinated, too sophisticated to be the work of any single family. Someone was orchestrating a campaign designed not just to stop the foundation, but to destroy everyone associated with it. The answer came from Maria Santos, who called me that evening with information that changed everything. "Robert, I've been doing some digging into the attacks on your foundation. You're not dealing with individual families anymore, you're up against a network." "What kind of network?" "Remember Vincent Kowalski, the security consultant who worked for the Whitmans? His business didn't die when he went to prison. It just got absorbed by a larger organization. They call themselves Sentinel Solutions, and they specialize in protecting wealthy clients from exactly the kind of exposure your foundation provides." Maria explained that Sentinel Solutions was essentially a private intelligence agency that served the ultra-wealthy. They provided everything from background checks and surveillance to active measures designed to discredit and destroy threats to their clients. They have former CIA agents, ex-FBI personnel, retired judges, and journalists on their payroll. When a family like the Whitmans gets exposed, Sentinel's other clients see it as a threat to their own security. So they pool resources to eliminate the threat. The threat being us. Exactly. And Robert, they're not going to stop with financial pressure and media attacks. I've seen their work before. They escalate until the threat is completely neutralized. What does that mean? It means they're going to try to put you in prison. The federal investigation into our finances intensified over the next month. Agents interviewed everyone who'd ever worked with the foundation, subpoenaed records going back years, and built a case that we were operating a sophisticated fraud scheme. The evidence they compiled was impressive in its creativity. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, emails that had been subtly altered to suggest criminal intent, witness statements from people claiming we'd promised them services we never delivered. Our lawyers told us the case was winnable, but it would take years to fight and cost more money than we could possibly raise. In the meantime, the foundation would remain shut down, and everyone associated with it would be under federal investigation. They don't need to convict you, our lead attorney explained. They just need to keep you tied up in legal proceedings until you run out of money and public support. That's when I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle. All along, I'd been focused on exposing individual families, solving specific cases, helping particular victims. But my real enemies weren't the families. They were the systems that protected those families, the networks that enabled their crimes, the infrastructure of wealth and power that made them untouchable. I called a meeting with Sarah and our remaining staff members. "We're shutting down," I announced. The Richardson Foundation for Justice is officially closing its doors. The room erupted in protests, but I held up my hand for silence. We're shutting down this foundation. But we're not shutting down the fight. I outlined my new plan. Instead of operating as a traditional nonprofit, we were going to become something different, a decentralized network of investigators, journalists, and activists who specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy. We're going to adopt their tactics, I explained. Anonymous operations, multiple funding sources, distributed leadership. They want to play hardball? Fine. We'll show them what hardball really looks like. Sarah looked concerned. Dad, that sounds like you're talking about breaking the law. I'm talking about operating in the gray areas where they've been operating for decades. Everything we do will be legal, but it won't be conventional. And it won't be easy to shut down. The transformation took 6 months to complete. We disbanded the Richardson Foundation and created a network of small, independent organizations that shared information and resources but had no official connections to each other. Each organization specialized in different aspects of the work: financial investigations, media relations, victim support, legal advocacy. I became the coordinator of what we called the Justice Network, but I had no formal authority over any of the member organizations. If one group was shut down or compromised, the others could continue operating independently. The funding came from cryptocurrency donations that were nearly impossible to trace, crowdfunding campaigns that couldn't be easily frozen, and direct support from victims who'd been helped by our previous work. Most importantly, we adopted the same compartmentalized operational security that intelligence agencies used. No single person knew all the details of ongoing operations, and information was shared only on a need-to-know basis. It worked better than I dared hope. Within a year, the Justice Network had exposed corruption in over 30 wealthy families across the country. We'd helped secure federal indictments in 8 states, recovered millions of dollars for victims, and forced policy changes in how domestic violence cases involving wealthy perpetrators were handled. But our success came with a price that I'm still paying today. The federal investigation into the Richardson Foundation was eventually dropped. They couldn't prove fraud when there wasn't any fraud to find. But the years of legal battles had consumed what little money I had left, and the stress had taken a toll on my health that I was only beginning to understand. More seriously, the Justice Network's success had made us targets for retaliation that went far beyond legal harassment. The first attempt on my life came on a Tuesday morning in March 2022. I was leaving my apartment. I'd lost the house to foreclosure the previous year, when I noticed a van parked across the street with its engine running. Something about it felt wrong, so I ducked back inside and called the police. The bomb squad found an improvised explosive device wired to my car's ignition. If I'd started the engine, the blast would have killed me instantly and probably taken out half the building. The device was professionally made, untraceable, and according to the FBI's explosive experts, consistent with techniques used by military contractors and private security firms. Someone really wants you dead, the lead investigator told me. And they have the resources to make it happen. Sarah was terrified. She begged me to shut down the Justice Network, to disappear somewhere safe where we could live quietly and anonymously. But I couldn't do it. There were too many families still suffering, too many victims who needed help, too many powerful people who thought their wealth made them immune to consequences. If I backed down now, everything we'd accomplished would be undone, and people like Derek Whitman would go back to believing they could hurt anyone they wanted without repercussions. Instead, I doubled down. I hired my own security team, former military personnel who specialized in protecting people from exactly the kind of threats I was facing. I moved to a secure location and implemented protocols that made me harder to find and harder to kill. And I kept fighting. But the war was about to take a turn that would test everything I believed about justice, revenge, and the price of both. There's a moment in every war when you realize you're not fighting for victory anymore, you're fighting for survival. For me, that moment came when they went after Sarah. I'd spent 3 years building networks, exposing corruption, and dodging assassination attempts. I thought I understood the rules of engagement. I thought I knew how far my enemies would go. But I was wrong about everything, and my daughter almost paid for my mistakes with her life. If you've ever had that sinking feeling that you're in over your head, that the forces arrayed against you are bigger and more ruthless than you ever imagined, you know how I felt when I got that phone call. Stay with me here, because what happened next changed everything, not just about the case, but about who I am as a person. Sarah had been living under an assumed name in Portland, Oregon, working as a counselor for domestic violence victims while staying as far away from the Justice Network's operations as possible. We'd agreed it was safer that way. The less connection she had to our activities, the less likely she'd become a target. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday in October 2022. "Is this Robert Mitchell?" The voice was professional, calm, terrifying in its matter-of-fact tone. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Detective Laura Vasquez with the Portland Police Department. Mr. Mitchell, your daughter Sarah has been involved in an incident. She's alive, but she's in critical condition at OHSU Hospital." The words hit me like physical blows. I was already reaching for my car keys before she finished speaking. "What kind of incident?" "She was attacked in her apartment. Multiple stab wounds, severe head trauma." "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you some questions about enemies your daughter might have made, people who might want to hurt her." I knew immediately this wasn't a random crime. Sarah lived in a secure building, worked under an assumed name, had been careful to avoid any connection to the Justice Network's activities. Someone had found her anyway, and someone had tried to kill her. "I'm driving to Portland right now," I told Detective Vasquez. "I'll be there in 8 hours. Mr. Mitchell, there's something else. The attack, it wasn't random. Whoever did this left a message." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of message?" "Words carved into your daughter's apartment door. It said, 'Tell your father we're done playing games.'" I drove from Philadelphia to Portland in 7.5 hours, stopping only for gas and pushing my rental car to speeds that should have gotten me arrested. Every mile of that drive was torture, my mind cycling between rage and terror and guilt. Sarah was alive, but barely. The doctors told me she'd lost massive amounts of blood, suffered a traumatic brain injury, and would need multiple surgeries to repair the damage. She was unconscious when I arrived, hooked to machines that beeped and hummed around her like electronic prayers. Detective Vasquez met me in the hospital waiting room. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet intensity that comes from seeing too much violence. "Tell me about your enemies," she said without preamble. So I did. I told her about the Justice Network, about the families we'd exposed, about Sentinel Solutions and their campaign to destroy us. I told her about the bomb in my car, the death threats, the escalating violence that had been building for over a year. Detective Vasquez listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook that she filled completely by the time I finished. "Mr. Mitchell," she said finally, "your daughter was tortured before she was stabbed. Whoever did this wanted information. They wanted to know about your operations, your contacts, your methods. Did she tell them anything?" "We don't know. She hasn't regained consciousness since we found her." The implications were staggering. If Sarah had been forced to reveal information about the Justice Network, every person involved was now at risk. Operations that had taken years to build could be compromised. Victims we were protecting could be exposed. But worse than any of that was the knowledge that my daughter had been tortured because of choices I'd made, because of a war I'd started. I spent the next 3 days at Sarah's bedside, watching machines breathe for her, and wondering if my quest for justice had finally cost me the person I'd been trying to protect all along. On the 4th day, she opened her eyes. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper, distorted by the breathing tube they'd finally removed. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." Sarah tried to sit up, winced in pain, and settled back against the pillows. Her face was still swollen from the beating, her left arm was in a cast, and there were bandages covering the stab wounds on her torso. "They knew," she said quietly. "They knew about the Justice Network, about the families we've been investigating. They knew things I didn't think anyone knew." "What did they want?" Names. Addresses. Financial information. They wanted to know how we operated, who our sources were, how we funded operations. I felt my heart sink. Did you tell them? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I tried not to, Dad. I really tried. But they had tools. And they said they'd find you and do worse to you if I didn't cooperate. It's okay, I said, taking her uninjured hand. You did what you had to do. They have everything, Dad. Names, locations, bank account numbers. Everyone in the network is compromised. The next few hours were a blur of encrypted phone calls and emergency protocols. I contacted every member of the Justice Network, warning them that their operations had been exposed and they needed to disappear immediately. Some listened. Others thought I was overreacting. The ones who didn't listen started disappearing within 48 hours. Maria Santos called me from a hotel room in Denver, where she'd been investigating a mining company's connection to human trafficking. Robert, they found me. 3 men broke into my apartment last night, but I wasn't there. My neighbor said they spent 2 hours going through everything, taking photographs, copying files. Where are you now? Driving east. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't go home. Robert, they had professional equipment, military-grade surveillance gear. This isn't just about money anymore. They're trying to eliminate everyone who knows about their operations. Tommy Brennan wasn't as lucky. The call about Tommy came from his daughter, who found his body in his Pittsburgh office on a Saturday morning. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the timing was too convenient, and there were no signs of Tommy's famous heart problems in his medical records. Janet Morrison, the reporter who'd been working on several of our cases, was killed in a car accident on a rainy highway outside Atlanta. Her brakes had failed, the same method that had been used to kill Amanda Richardson 6 years earlier. Within 2 weeks, half the Justice Network was either dead, missing, or in hiding. I realized with growing horror that my war against powerful families had metastasized into something I'd never intended, a systematic campaign of murder designed to eliminate everyone who'd ever opposed them. And I was next on the list. The attempt came while I was still in Portland, still keeping vigil at Sarah's bedside. I'd stepped out of the hospital to get coffee when I noticed a man in a maintenance uniform following me. He was good, professional, careful to keep his distance, but I'd been living with heightened awareness for so long that I spotted him immediately. Instead of returning to the hospital, I led him away from the building, through downtown Portland's busy streets, looking for a place where I could confront him without endangering innocent people. I found it in a parking garage attached to a shopping mall. Empty, isolated, with security cameras that had been conveniently disabled. The man was waiting for me on the 3rd level, no longer bothering to hide. He was younger than me, maybe 40, with the kind of physical fitness that screamed military training. Robert Mitchell, he said, not really a question. That's me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol with a silencer attached. You've caused a lot of people a lot of trouble. Good, I said. That was the point. He smiled, but it was cold and professional. Nothing personal, old man. Just business. But he'd made a mistake. He'd assumed that because I was 65 years old, because I walked with a slight limp from an old construction injury, because I looked like someone's grandfather, I wasn't dangerous. He'd forgotten about Vietnam. When he raised the gun, I was already moving. 20 years of construction work had kept me stronger than I looked, and 40 years of hunting had taught me how to move quietly and strike fast. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, he was unconscious and I was holding his gun. I searched his wallet and found identification for 3 different names, credit cards that traced to shell companies, and a hotel key card. Most importantly, I found a cell phone with text messages that revealed more about my enemies than months of investigation had uncovered. The messages were from someone identified only as Control, giving detailed instructions about targets, methods, and timelines. According to the texts, the systematic elimination of Justice Network members was just the beginning of something much larger. Phase 1 complete, one message read. Proceed to Phase 2. Target list attached. The target list made my blood run cold. It included not just Justice Network members, but journalists who'd covered our cases, FBI agents who'd investigated the families we'd exposed, even judges who'd ruled against wealthy defendants in domestic violence cases. They weren't just trying to stop the Justice Network. They were trying to eliminate everyone who'd ever stood up to wealthy abusers. I photographed everything in the assassin's phone, then made 2 calls. The first was to Detective Vasquez. "I have a gift for you," I told her, giving her the location of the unconscious gunman and explaining what I'd found on his phone. The second call was to Maria Santos. "They're not just hunting us," I told her. "They're planning to kill everyone: judges, cops, journalists, anyone who's ever been a threat to their clients." Jesus Christ, Robert. How do we stop something like that? "We don't stop it," I said, understanding finally what I had to do. "We end it." That night, while Sarah slept under police protection in her hospital room, I sat in a motel outside Portland and planned the most dangerous operation of my life. For 3 years, I'd been playing defense, reacting to their moves, trying to protect people from their attacks, building cases within the legal system. But the legal system was compromised, law enforcement was outgunned, and they were killing people faster than I could expose them. It was time to go on offense. The Justice Network was finished. Too many people were dead or compromised for it to continue operating. But from its ashes, I was going to build something new, something that could fight back against enemies who thought murder was just another business expense. I was going to become the thing I'd been fighting against, someone who operated outside the law, who used violence to solve problems, who made people disappear when they became inconvenient. The only difference was that I was going to target the right people. Sarah woke up the next morning to find a letter on her nightstand. "Sweetheart," it read, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The people who hurt you, who killed our friends, who think they can terrorize anyone who stands up to them, they're about to learn what real consequences look like. I'm done playing by rules that only apply to good people. I'm done building cases that corrupt judges can dismiss. I'm done watching evil people destroy innocent lives while hiding behind their money and connections. They wanted a war. Now they're going to get one. Don't try to find me. Don't try to stop me. And don't blame yourself for what I'm about to do. This was always going to end one way. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to understand that. I love you more than life itself. That's why I have to do this. Dad." By the time the nurses found the letter, I was already 3 states away, driving toward a confrontation that would either end the threat to everyone I loved or get me killed in the attempt. Either way, the war was about to reach its conclusion. They say when you hunt monsters, you risk becoming a monster yourself. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes becoming a monster is the only way to protect the people you love. I spent 6 months learning how to be someone I'd never wanted to become. 6 months studying my enemies' methods, adopting their tactics, preparing to fight a war where the only rule was survival. If you've ever reached that point where the system has failed you so completely that you're willing to step outside it entirely, you understand why I made the choices I'm about to describe. And if you're still here, still listening, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you will show you how far an ordinary man can fall when he's pushed past his breaking point. The first thing I did was disappear. Robert Mitchell, the construction worker, the father, the founder of the Justice Network, that person ceased to exist. I closed bank accounts, abandoned credit cards, threw away identification documents, and became a ghost moving through a world where cash was king and anonymity was survival. I spent 2 months in a cabin in rural Montana, growing a beard, losing weight, and learning skills I'd never needed before. How to create fake identities. How to obtain untraceable weapons. How to move through cities without leaving electronic footprints. Most importantly, I learned how to kill efficiently. I'd killed people in Vietnam, but that was war, distant, impersonal, justified by uniform and flag and the shared understanding that we were all soldiers. This was different. This was personal, calculated, and entirely outside any system of law or morality I'd ever recognized. My teacher was a man named Jack Reeves, a former Navy SEAL who'd spent 20 years doing the kind of work that doesn't appear on official records. Jack had been recommended by one of my old military contacts, a guy who understood what I was planning without me having to explain it. You sure about this? Jack asked during our first meeting at his isolated Montana compound. Because once you cross this line, there's no going back. You won't be a good guy anymore, Robert. You'll just be the bad guy fighting other bad guys. I'm sure, I said. All right then. Let's turn you into someone they should be afraid of. Jack's training was brutal and comprehensive. Physical conditioning that left me exhausted and sore every day. Weapons training with pistols, rifles, and improvised weapons. Urban infiltration techniques. Interrogation methods that I tried not to think about too hard. But the most important lessons were psychological. Your enemies think like predators, Jack explained during one of our evening sessions. They're used to hunting prey that runs, hides, or fights back within legal constraints. They've never dealt with prey that hunts back using their own methods. What's the key to beating them? Surprise, speed, and absolute ruthlessness. The moment you hesitate, the moment you let conscience or law or morality slow you down, you're dead. I absorbed everything Jack taught me, but part of me died in the process. The Robert Mitchell who'd built houses and raised a daughter and believed in justice was being replaced by someone colder, harder, more willing to do terrible things for what I told myself were good reasons. After 2 months, Jack declared me ready. You're not going to win any wars single-handedly, he warned. But you're dangerous enough now that they'll have to take you seriously. Just remember, the moment you start enjoying this, the moment killing becomes easy instead of necessary, you've lost yourself completely. I drove away from Jack's compound with a new identity, a cache of untraceable weapons, and a list of targets that I'd been compiling for 3 years. The first name on the list was Vincent Kowalski. Vincent was serving a life sentence in federal prison for his role in Amanda Richardson's murder, but prison hadn't made him any less dangerous. According to my sources, he was still running operations from his cell, coordinating the systematic elimination of Justice Network members through a network of associates who visited him regularly. Getting to Vincent required infiltrating one of the most secure federal prisons in the country. But I'd learned from Jack that the most secure facilities often had the most exploitable weaknesses, usually human ones. I spent 2 weeks studying the prison's operations, identifying staff members who might be vulnerable to corruption, mapping the routines that governed Vincent's daily life. What I found was a system designed to be impenetrable from the outside but surprisingly porous once you understood how it worked. The key was Marcus Webb, a corrections officer with gambling debts and an ex-wife who was bleeding him dry with alimony payments. Marcus needed money badly enough to be stupid, and he had access to the high-security wing where Vincent was housed. I approached Marcus through intermediaries, offering him $50,000 to arrange a private meeting with Vincent. Marcus thought I was a journalist looking for an exclusive interview with a notorious criminal. He had no idea he was helping me plan an execution. The meeting took place on a Tuesday afternoon in November, in a small conference room used for attorney visits. Marcus had falsified the records to show that I was Vincent's lawyer, and the security cameras in the room had been conveniently disabled for maintenance. Vincent Kowalski was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 55 years old, with gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that comes from years in prison. But his eyes were alert and intelligent, and he recognized me immediately. Robert Mitchell, he said as the guards closed the door behind us. I was wondering when you'd come calling. Were you? Oh yes. You've been quite the thorn in certain people's sides. Cost them a lot of money, a lot of relationships. They're very eager to see you dealt with permanently. Vincent leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed despite being locked in a room with someone who'd traveled across the country to confront him. The question is, he continued, are you here to try to make some kind of deal, or are you here to do something stupid? I'm here to ask you a question, I said. How many people have you killed? Vincent smiled. Directly? Maybe a dozen over the years. But if you count the people I've arranged to have killed, The suicides I've orchestrated, the accidents I've facilitated, probably closer to 50. He said it casually, like he was discussing the weather. Amanda Richardson? Break lines are surprisingly easy to tamper with if you know what you're doing. Poor girl never had a chance. The Justice Network members? That was a group effort. Multiple contractors working simultaneously. Very efficient. Vincent studied my face, looking for some reaction. You know what the funny thing is, Robert? I actually respect what you did. Taking on wealthy families, exposing their secrets, building a network to fight back, that took real skill and courage. But you made one critical mistake. You tried to fight evil with good. You used legal methods against people who operate outside the law. You built organizations that could be destroyed, relied on systems that could be corrupted. Vincent leaned forward. You should have just started killing people from the beginning. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small device that Jack had given me, a spring-loaded syringe loaded with a drug that would cause instant cardiac arrest and leave no trace in toxicology tests. You're absolutely right, I said, and drove the needle into Vincent's neck. Vincent's eyes widened in surprise, then understanding. He tried to call for help, but the drug was already working. Within 30 seconds, he was dead, slumped over the table like he'd suffered a massive heart attack. I pressed the call button to summon the guards, then spent the next 10 minutes playing the role of a horrified attorney whose client had just died during their meeting. The prison medical team pronounced Vincent dead from natural causes, and I walked out of that facility having committed the first premeditated murder of my life. I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no satisfaction. Vincent Kowalski had been a problem that needed to be solved, and I'd solved it. The emotional numbness scared me more than the act itself. But I didn't have time for self-reflection. Vincent's death would send a message to my enemies that the rules had changed, and they'd respond quickly and violently. I was right. Within 48 hours, there were attempts on the lives of 3 people I'd worked with over the years. A journalist in Chicago was shot outside her apartment building. A former FBI agent in Denver was killed by a car bomb. A judge in Miami who'd ruled against wealthy defendants in several domestic violence cases was found dead in his swimming pool. The message was clear: they could kill faster than I could. But they'd made a mistake. In their haste to retaliate, they'd revealed the scope of their operations and the identities of their key personnel. For the first time, I had a complete picture of the network I was fighting: names, faces, locations, and relationships. I spent the next month moving through that network like a disease, eliminating key players one by one. David Chin, the banker who'd frozen the Justice Network's accounts, died in a skiing accident in Colorado, except that his bindings had been tampered with and his body showed signs of being pushed down a particularly steep slope. Margaret Hoffman, the prosecutor who derailed several of our cases through procedural sabotage, succumbed to an allergic reaction at a restaurant in Washington, D.C., despite having no known allergies and eating food she'd ordered dozens of times before. Thomas Brennan, not my friend Tommy, but a judge who dismissed charges against 3 wealthy abusers, died in his sleep from what appeared to be natural causes, though the insulin injection site on his arm suggested otherwise. Each death looked accidental or natural. Each elimination weakened the network that had been protecting wealthy families from consequences. Each killing made me more efficient and more ruthless. But it also made me more isolated. I couldn't contact Sarah, couldn't reach out to old friends, couldn't maintain any connection to the person I'd been before. I was becoming exactly what Jack had warned me about, a monster who justified monstrous acts with noble intentions. The breaking point came when I found Maria Santos. I'd been tracking down members of the network who targeted Justice Network personnel, following a trail that led to a private security firm in Nevada. What I found there was Maria, hanging from the ceiling of an abandoned warehouse, tortured to death in ways that would haunt my dreams forever. Pinned to her body was a note. "Your move, Mitchell." I stared at Maria's corpse, this brilliant, brave woman who'd helped me understand the scope of corruption I was fighting, and felt something snap inside me. I'd been picking off individual members of the network, trying to dismantle their operations piece by piece. But they were killing innocent people faster than I could eliminate guilty ones. It was time to stop playing their game and start playing mine. The plan I conceived that night in the Nevada desert was simple, brutal, and completely outside anything I'd ever imagined myself capable of. I was going to kill them all. Not just the operatives and enforcers, but the families who employed them. Not just the people who gave orders, but the people who wrote checks. Not just the individuals who'd hurt Sarah and murdered Maria, but the entire system that made such people possible. It would require resources I didn't have, skills I hadn't mastered, and a level of ruthlessness that would destroy whatever was left of my soul. But Maria Santos deserved justice. Amanda Richardson deserved justice. All the victims who'd been silenced, intimidated, or murdered deserved better than the half measures I'd been pursuing. I drove east through the night, already planning the largest mass killing in modern American history. Behind me, the warehouse where Maria had died burned to the ground, destroying evidence and announcing to my enemies that their war with Robert Mitchell was about to reach its final phase. They'd wanted a monster. Now they were going to get one. You know what the hardest part about planning mass murder is? It's not the logistics. Those are just problems to be solved. It's not the moral implications. I'd stopped caring about those months ago. The hardest part is accepting that once you cross that line, you can never go back to being the person you used to be. I spent 3 months planning what I called the reckoning. 3 months identifying targets, mapping locations, and preparing for a single night of violence that would either destroy my enemies completely or get me killed in the attempt. If you've ever felt that moment when you realize you've gone too far to turn back, when the only way forward is through the darkest possible choice, you understand where I was in the winter of 2023. And if this story is making you question what you'd be willing to do to protect the people you love, leave a comment below, because what I'm about to describe will test every assumption you have about justice and revenge. The targets were spread across 12 states, living in mansions and penthouses that were supposed to be impregnable fortresses. Wealthy families who'd used their money and connections to avoid consequences for decades of abuse, murder, and corruption. The Ashfords in Connecticut, who'd beaten their daughter-in-law to death and made it look like suicide. The Kensington family in Texas, whose oil fortune was built on environmental destruction and whose patriarch had been raping his granddaughters for years. The Steinbergs in California, who ran a pharmaceutical company that knowingly sold contaminated drugs to third-world countries. 17 families in total, plus their key associates and enablers. Over 100 people who'd used their wealth as a shield against justice. I couldn't kill them all personally. I wasn't skilled enough or numerous enough for that scale of operation. But I had something they didn't expect: connections to people who'd been hurt by the system these families represented. Veterans who'd been abandoned by VA hospitals run by their cronies. Parents whose children had died from their contaminated products. Former employees who'd been destroyed for trying to expose their crimes. All it took was the right information, the right motivation, and the right tools. I called it crowdsourced justice. The first phase began on a Monday evening in February. Simultaneously across 12 states, packages were delivered to 17 addresses. Each package contained detailed evidence of the recipient family's crimes, along with proof that conventional justice would never reach them. But more importantly, each package contained the home addresses of everyone who'd helped cover up those crimes: judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, journalists. The message was simple: they had 72 hours to turn themselves into federal authorities and confess everything. If they didn't, the evidence would be released publicly, and they'd face consequences outside the legal system. Most of them ignored the ultimatum. The second phase began Thursday night. David Ashford was the first to die. He was leaving his country club after dinner when a sniper's bullet took him down in the parking lot. The shooter was never identified, but security cameras captured a figure in military fatigues who moved with professional precision. Margaret Kensington died 2 hours later, poisoned by a server at her favorite restaurant, a young woman whose younger brother had died from cancer caused by Kensington Company chemicals. By Friday morning, 7 of my primary targets were dead, and the survivors were beginning to understand that their wealth couldn't protect them from an enemy who operated outside the system they'd corrupted. The response was swift and predictable. Every law enforcement agency in the country was mobilized to find me. My photograph was on every news channel, my name was on every wanted list. They offered a $10 million reward for information leading to my capture. But I'd anticipated this. I'd spent months creating false identities, establishing safe houses, and building networks of people who had reason to hate the families I was targeting. More importantly, I'd learned from Vincent Kowalski's methods. Instead of relying on a centralized organization that could be compromised, I created a decentralized network of independent actors who shared information through encrypted channels and operated without direct oversight. They couldn't stop what I'd started because they didn't understand how it worked. The third phase began the following Monday. 12 federal judges received packages containing evidence of their corruption, along with photographs of their families and addresses of their children's schools. The message was clear: retire immediately and confess your crimes, or face consequences. 37 prosecutors across 15 states received similar packages. Over 100 police chiefs and sheriffs found envelopes in their mailboxes with documentation of the cases they'd buried, the evidence they'd destroyed, the victims they'd silenced. The entire network that had protected wealthy abusers for decades was suddenly facing exposure and potential elimination. Some of them broke. Judge Harold Morrison in Delaware confessed to taking bribes from the Ashford family in exchange for dismissing domestic violence charges. His confession led to the reopening of dozens of cases and the exposure of a corruption network that reached into the state attorney general's office. Prosecutor Linda Chin in Nevada released files showing how wealthy families had paid her to sabotage cases against them. Her revelations triggered federal investigations in 12 states. But others fought back. The FBI launched Operation Clean Sweep, designed to capture me and dismantle what they called a terrorist network targeting America's wealthiest families. They portrayed me as a deranged vigilante whose actions threatened the rule of law itself. The media campaign was sophisticated and effective. Stories appeared depicting me as a domestic terrorist whose vendetta against wealthy families was motivated by jealousy and mental illness. The victims I'd helped were characterized as willing participants in a fraudulent scheme to extort money from successful business families. Most damaging of all, they found Sarah. Despite my precautions, despite her assumed identity and hidden location, they tracked her down to a small town in Oregon where she'd been working as a teacher. The confrontation was broadcast live on national television. Sarah stood on the steps of a courthouse, surrounded by FBI agents and news cameras, while a federal prosecutor read charges against me for domestic terrorism, murder, and conspiracy. "Sarah Mitchell," the prosecutor said, "your father is wanted in connection with the murders of 17 people across 12 states. Federal authorities believe he's planning additional attacks that could claim hundreds of lives. Do you have any information about his whereabouts or his plans?" Sarah looked directly into the cameras, and for a moment I saw the strong, determined woman she'd been before Derek Whitman broke her spirit. "My father," she said clearly, "is the most honorable man I've ever known. Everything he's done to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The families he's targeting aren't innocent victims, they're predators who've used their wealth to escape justice for decades." The prosecutor interrupted. "Ms. Mitchell, your father has committed murder. The people my father killed were murderers themselves," Sarah shot back. "Vincent Kowalski killed dozens of people, including my husband's first wife. David Ashford beat his daughter-in-law to death. Margaret Kensington's company has poisoned thousands of people with contaminated drugs." Sarah stepped closer to the microphones. "My father tried to fight these people through the legal system for years. He built cases, gathered evidence, worked with law enforcement. But the system is corrupted by their money. Judges are bought, prosecutors are paid off, police look the other way." Her voice grew stronger. "So yes, my father became something I never thought he could become. But he became that thing because it was the only way to protect innocent people from monsters who thought they were untouchable." Sarah looked directly into the camera. "Dad, if you're watching this, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. And I want you to finish what you started." The FBI agents moved to arrest her for aiding and abetting, but the damage was done. Sarah's words had been broadcast live to millions of people, many of whom were beginning to question the official narrative about my campaign. Support for what the media called my vigilante crusade began building in unexpected places. Online forums erupted with people sharing their own stories about wealthy families who'd escaped justice. Victims of the families I'd targeted came forward with testimony that had been suppressed for years. Investigative journalists began looking into the connections between my targets and the officials who'd protected them. Most significantly, other people began taking action. A pharmaceutical executive in North Carolina was found dead in his office, killed by a parent whose child had died from contaminated vaccines. The security footage showed the killer calmly walking into the building, shooting the executive, and walking out, just like I'd done with Vincent Kowalski. A real estate developer in Florida who'd been evicting families from low-income housing was killed by a sniper while playing golf at his private club. A hedge fund manager who'd stolen pension funds from union workers was poisoned at a charity dinner by a waiter whose retirement had been destroyed by the theft. What I'd started as a personal vendetta had become something larger, a nationwide uprising against wealthy families who thought their money made them immune to consequences. But it was also becoming something I could no longer control. The killings were spreading beyond my target list, beyond the families who'd specifically wronged me or the Justice Network. Wealthy people were being murdered based on nothing more than public perception of their guilt. A software billionaire who donated millions to charity was killed because someone decided his business practices were exploitative. A pharmaceutical heiress who'd spent years funding medical research was murdered because her grandfather's company had once produced harmful drugs. The movement I'd started was becoming an indiscriminate war against wealth itself. And in the chaos, my real enemies were escaping. Charles Whitman, Derek's father, had fled to a private island in the Caribbean where he was protected by mercenaries and international law. Patricia Whitman had disappeared into a network of safe houses maintained by the same organization that had employed Vincent Kowalski. Derek himself had been transferred from federal prison to a secure facility whose location was classified, supposedly for his own protection. The people who'd started this whole nightmare by abusing my daughter were still alive, still free, and still beyond my reach. Worse, the nationwide violence I'd unleashed was giving them exactly the excuse they needed to justify even more extreme measures. Emergency laws were passed allowing indefinite detention of anyone suspected of supporting anti-wealth terrorism. Military units were deployed to protect wealthy families and their properties. A special federal task force was created with unlimited resources and broad authority to hunt down everyone connected to what they called the Mitchell Network. The war I'd started to protect innocent people was being used to justify the creation of a police state designed to protect the wealthy from any form of accountability. I realized with growing horror that I'd made everything worse. The system I'd been fighting against was using my actions to become even more oppressive, even more corrupt, even more tilted in favor of the powerful. And Sarah, brave, principled Sarah who'd stood up for me on national television, was now a federal fugitive, hunted by every law enforcement agency in the country. I'd set out to destroy my enemies and ended up destroying everything I'd tried to protect. But there was still one chance to make it right. One final gamble that would either end the nightmare I'd created or consume everything I had left. The location was a heavily fortified compound in Montana where the surviving members of the families I'd targeted were gathering under federal protection. The plan was to infiltrate that compound and broadcast live testimony from the people who'd ordered the murders, the abuse, the cover-ups that had driven me to violence. If I could get them to confess their crimes on camera, if I could show the world exactly what I'd been fighting against, maybe I could end the cycle of violence and revenge that was consuming the country. It was probably a suicide mission.